I think we're recording. Let's let the technology catch up. Hi, my name is Chelsea Asher. I am working in tandem with Robert Capon. The topic of our presentation is modernist treatment of the quote unquote impolite, when people stop being polite and start getting real. This is part one. In part one, we will examine and think through the topic and motif of sex in T.S. Eliot's work. And Robert's video will pick up where I left off and think through politics and religion. Our thesis. T.S. Eliot weaponizes societal norms within his poetry to critique the moral decay of early 20th century modernity through realistic depiction of corrupt politics, seemingly indecorous sexuality, and bastardized religion. Our presentation objectives. Defend our thesis, arguing an original interpretation of T.S. Eliot through his treatment of the quote-unquote impolite subjects. Examine the depiction of these topics through Eliot's major works to identify prevailing motifs or treatment. Survey and synthesize critical reception and inferred textual evidence to substantiate our findings, and elucidate implications of our research within the scope of literary criticism and reception of T.S. Eliot's work. In the use of poetry and the use of criticism, Eliot argues that poetry may help to break up the conventional modes of perception and valuation, which are perpetually forming, and make people see the world afresh, or some new part of it. It may make us from time to time a little more aware of the deeper unnamed feelings which form from the substratum of our being, to which we rarely penetrate, for our lives are mostly a constant evasion of ourselves and an invasion of the visible and sensible world. His work aims to do just that. Open your eyes. Eliot departs from the Romantic poetic tradition to paint a more apt picture of his reality at the turn of the 20th century. And reflecting on this era of poetry, Eliot bemoans everything else was cheerfulness, optimism, and hopefulness, and these words stood for a great deal of what one hated in the 19th century. Eliot's work denies the easy serenity of the misty mountaintop or idyllic fields of his predecessors, seeking to reveal that the mist is actually polluted smog and the individualism of the Romantic heroes actually just depraved hubris. The reality, however, is antithetical to the ideal, and modern social conventions or traditions are merely a hollow, meaningless facade, resulting in trivial, daily, empty routines and hollow human encounters, quaintly maintained in the name of quote-unquote social conventions. This sentiment is most keenly demonstrated in Eliot's treatment of sex, politics, and religion. These are the pillars of society, the manifestation of human interconnectivity, the place where we are most reliant upon human understanding and accord, and are, in fact, the most impoverished. These topics are critical motifs and one of the most salient themes throughout Eliot's work, a pervasive psychological wound that has frayed the connective tissues of humanity. A world war stands in direct defiance of seemingly implicit or at least tacitly inferred ethos of human nature. The quote-unquote rules, or at least the implied aspects of human decency, are most notably absent in the current iterations of human exchange, political dogmas, and religious application. The impact of Eliot's illustration of the depleted human condition are most aptly demonstrated through these three central aspects of human life that attempt to find balance and harmony amongst the sometimes discordant ends of humanity. Eliot's poetry seeks to convey the universality of this epidemic. This is not attributable to identity demographics like social class, religion, race, age, gender, etc. The entirety of the human populace. We are all impacted. More importantly, we are all complicit. The assumption of belief is not the application of belief. Rosy-colored glasses don't articulate the nuances of co-opting tacit cooperative agreements. The quote-unquote taboo or quote-unquote impolite topics like sex, religion, and politics are thoroughly and critically examined to more discernibly produce an original artistic rendering of this moment in time, one that isn't coded in idealism, rather expressing the truth, as disconcerting and uncomfortable as that may be. It's critical. Critic Preston argues the poetry of T.S. Eliot is a poetry which is committed to penetrating the substratum of our being and to removing the veil which covers the visible and sensible world. It is a poetry which seeks at all times to clarify what we are and examine the nature of the universe we find ourselves in. In short, it is a poetry of awareness. In Tradition and the Individual Talent, Eliot argues that what makes a writer most acutely conscious of his place in time is an awareness, not merely mimicry, of preceding works. Some of the most influential to his own are those of Charles Baudelaire and Jules Laforge. Jules Laforge became, as Eliot put it, the first to teach me how to speak, to teach me the poetic possibility of my own idiom of speech. Critic Soldo notes, LaForge taught him the essence of poetry, how to speak in his own voice. Eliot found a new beauty in the directness of speech. Plain speech is turned into poetry. Additionally, Baudelaire's groundbreaking work, Fleurs du Mal, provided a modernist lens through which to explore urban life, with emphasis on examining the sordid or seemingly quote-unquote taboo topics, understanding these components as critical to and incapable of being divorced from the reality of urban life. Ironically enough, he was prosecuted for this work after its publication, and 6 stories were omitted until almost 100 years later because of Baudelaire's equivalence of all individuals in the urban scene, a trope that became pivotal to Eliot's work as well. Inspired by these writers, Eliot utilizes vivid, realistic imagery and colloquial language to sharply delineate and juxtapose the idealism of the past with the rotting corpse, literary and metaphorically, of Eliot's today, post-World War I. This sentiment is explicitly depicted in Baudelaire's Le Coucher du Soleil Romantique, translated the sunset of romanticism. This is featured in Fleurs du Mal. How beautiful a new sun is when it rises, happy whoever hails with sweet emotion. As the poem continues, reality pushes through the idealistic portrayal. But I pursue the vanishing god in vain. An odor of the tomb floats in the shadow. At the swamp's edge, feet faltering I go, bruising damp slugs and unexpected toads. In the same vein as Baudelaire, Eliot uses vivid imagery to juxtapose an ideal state with reality. The beginning of The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock reads as Eliot's own swan song of romanticism. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. The halcyon imagery and lilting flow is almost immediately repudiated and replaced with a depiction of dingy streets of ill repute. Like a patient etherized upon a table, let us go through certain half-deserted streets of insidious intent. This is further emphasized the depiction of yellow fog and yellow smoke that alights upon every surface of the city, another motif rife throughout Fleurs du Mal, also indicating the pervasiveness of this moment. This rendering of the city stands as a backdrop to the psychological ramblings of the narrator, who is drawn to the women in the room, but too concerned with potential reproach and judgment of those around him to actually engage. Similar to Baudelaire, the romantic sentiment is swiftly denied at the end of the poem. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea by seagulls wreathed with seaweed red and brown till human voices wake us and we drown. The title promises a love song, but this is meticulously dismantled by exposing the reality of human experience in light of the ideal of love or human connection. Sex, let alone even discussion with women, is off the table because the narrator is so preoccupied with perseverating with the idea of engagement. The current milieu evinces impotence due to psychic panic. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock serves as Eliot's own farewell to romanticism and establishes a persistent trope of tainted, strained, or completely incapable sexuality in the modern age. Other iterations of poor human engagement can be discerned in the musings of narrators in Portrait of a Lady and Gerontion. Fraught human connection is implicitly addressed in each narrator's inability to feel connection with their subjects. In Portrait of a Lady, the dynamics of the relationship are further exacerbated by the performance of the social customs. The discordant auditory imagery reflects the discordant human interaction, i.e., ariettes of cracked cornets paired with a dull tom-tom absurdly hammering a prelude of its own in the narrator's head. The absurdity of the social custom in relation to its intended effect of bringing people together is aptly depicted to that of an animal sideshow act. Dance, dance like a dancing bear, cry like a parrot, chatter like an ape. The poem ends with another interior monologue of male anxiety and perseveration, not knowing what to feel, if I understand, or whether wise or foolish, tardy or too soon. In the absence of human engagement, the narrator is left only with his frenetic and anxious thoughts. A potential extended result of this is explored in Gerontion, wherein the older male narrator's inner monologue can be read as a retrospective. I have lost my passion. Why should I need to keep it, since what is kept must be adulterated? He continues musing, I have lost my sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. How should I use them for your closer contact? Yet again, we have a portrayal of a man plagued by his own inner monologue of anxiety, but Gerontion provides the initial seeds of pollution, adulteration of human interaction. In his essay, The Women Come and Go, Lewis Maynard explains, the sex in Eliot's poetry is almost always bad sex, either libidinally limp or morally vicious. But that's because for Eliot, bad sex was a symptom of failure of civilization, and is a fallacy to conclude that because sex in his poems is disgusting, Eliot was disgusted by sex. Eliot was disgusted by modern life, period. That he found a way to express that disgust through lurid sexual characterization was one of the reasons his poetry seemed in its time so compelling. Sex is explicitly addressed in Eliot's earlier poems, Burbank with the Baedeker, Glycine with a Cigar, wherein Eliot uses the rotting corpses below Venice as a metaphor for the rotted state of human interaction. Eliot seeks to dismantle the romantic image of Venice in the quote-unquote hero figure by exposing that these ideals are merely a facade and the reality is a saggy bending of the knees and elbows, a meager blue-nailed fascistic hand, and the rats underneath the city. The idealists starkly and viscerally juxtapose the reality. The poem ends with yet another male narrator meditating on time's ruin and the seven laws. Here, Eliot's imagery compares decrepit corporeality with decrepit topography to dismantle the ideal and reveal the reality. Sweeney Erect is one of Eliot's works that most explicitly uses sex as a mirror for revealing the current deteriorated state of human interaction. Similar to Gerontian, the imagery elicits sentiments of grandeur, evoking the image of the narrator comparable to a god dominating the natural terrain. Paint me a cavernous waste shore. Paint me the bold and fractious rocks faced by the snarling and yelping seas. Display me Aeolus above, reviewing the insurgent gales. However, similar to the effect of shifting out of frame of a snapshot filter, this mythic filter too is quickly denied, and we are left with the corporeal estimation of a man equated to an ape, gesture of orang-utang, this withered root of knots of hair slitted below and gashed with eyes, this oval O cropped with teeth. The sickle motion from the thighs. Just as starkly and crudely as Sweeney is depicted, so is the sex that ensues. Jackknifes upward at the knees, then straightens out from the heel to hip. To this sexual encounter, Sweeney rises to shave, and his feelings of self-aggrandizement is ironically juxtaposed with his physical countenance. The lengthened shadow of a man is history, said Emerson, who had not seen the silhouette of Sweeney straddled in the sun. The debasement of the encounter is further emphasized by the events that ensue, wherein Sweeney leaves his presumably female sexual partner, since Sweeney, quote-unquote, knows the female temperament, to work, quote-unquote, epileptic fit on the bed, not determined if this is an orgasm, and even if it was, the diction doesn't induce positive connotations in the reader. And the ladies of the corridor find themselves involved, disgraced, observing the hysteria, which elicits Doris to do some damage control, bringing brandy and smelling salts, which inspires the reader to assume that the sexual encounter was for capital, not consensual pleasure. This notion is further emphasized in Sweeney Among the Nightingales, wherein Sweeney is once again compared to an overexcited ape-neck Sweeney, his jaw swelling to immaculate giraffe. The poem depicts Sweeney's interaction with local prostitutes, and the scene ends with a visceral depiction of feces. Critic Free notes, Eliot's approach to poetry invites the full person into the world of the poetry, merging the private world of the person with the private world of the poem. In this way, his poetry prods people to take deep hidden things, the intangible, and make them incarnate. Eliot tasks art with revealing the incarnation of the intangible. Eliot noted, I think that from Baudelaire, I learned first precedent for the poetical possibilities, never developed by any poet writing in my language, of the more sordid aspects of modern metropolis, of the possibility of fusion between the sordidly realistic and the phantasmagoric, the possibility of the juxtaposition of the matter-of-fact and the fantastic. These earlier works demonstrate this influence of Baudelaire, where the fantastic is derived from epic grand imagery of classic works. This influence, however, is most adroitly demonstrated in The Wasteland. For example, Eliot's Unreal City reimagines Baudelaire's depiction of Paris in Les Sept Vieillards, also featured in Fleur de Mal. Formillon cité pleine d'archives, où le spectre en plein jour approche la passion. The inspired moniker Unreal City evokes a dreamlike psychological hellscape that teeters between present need for something more, a dream of hope, and a lingering haunting past. Eliot contrasts myriad classical references with vignettes of modern life to demonstrate the moral decay. Critic Sharma explains, Eliot portrays sexual perversion as a symptom of the disintegration of traditional values in post-World War I disillusionment. The illusions and depictions of current human affairs reflect the spectrum of human engagement, none of which are promising or desired. This can be discerned even in the poem's epigraph, wherein Eliot references Sybil, who is condemned to a life of eternal shrinking because she refuses to give up her virginity in exchange for eternal life. The epigraph, prior to the dedication to Ezra Pound, ends with the Greek iteration of Sybil's request, I want to die. Right from the start, the reader is presented with a disconcerting iteration of sexuality. Section 1 alludes to Countess Marie Leriche, who played a role in the salacious murder-suicide of key political figures and lovers, also known as the Mayerline incident, which eventually led to the inception of World War I. The reference to torpid sexuality and its bitter results cannot be denied here. This is also the most blatant expression of political recrimination. In the game of chess, references to rape of Philomena, in contrast to the female figure incapable of formulating coherent thoughts or even possessing the ability to talk with her companion, elucidates the incapacity of human engagement, which is further exacerbated in Will's vignette, exposing and discussing providing the discussion of multiple pregnancies and abortions, highlighting misplaced values and the commodification of sexuality to uphold social pressures. In section 3, the typist embodies another version of female commodification, and she passively endures her lover's seemingly lascivious endeavors. After he departs, she smooths her hair with an automatic hand, suggesting dehumanization. Again, critic Sharma. Eliot uses the portrayal to critique the hollow and disenchanted nature of modern relationships, reflecting a broader societal malaise where true connection and fulfillment are increasingly elusive. This section also brings to mind LaForge's poem Petition. No one is free. Everyone stands around with their hands on their hips. Everywhere, love changes hands simply, with about as much real commitment and belief as people show when saying good morning to each other. LaForge and Eliot both depict sex as devoid of genuine intimacy, as the woman's indifference suggests a resignation to her circumstances rather than active participation or desire. This is underscored through the subsequent song and depiction of the Thames' daughter's rape, lamentations, and the charred remains of Carthage. Eliot remarked, "It is therefore a constant reminder to the poet of the obligation to explore, to find words for the inarticulate, to capture those feelings which people can hardly even feel because they have no words for them, and at the same time a reminder that the explorer beyond the frontiers of ordinary consciousness will only be able to return and report to his fellow citizens if he has all the time a firm grasp on the realities with which they are already acquainted." It's exactly by confronting these assumptions and expectations of the impolite topics that Eliot fulfills this purpose. The performance of expected polite behavior enabled this current milieu, enabled this moral demise. You, hypocrite, lecteur, mon semble, mon frère. You, yes, you, open your eyes and look around. No, really look. You may be uncomfortable, but it's important. You're not simply a bystander. Thank you for your time.